The morning my husband told me to get out, he was still in his pajamas, drinking coffee like it was any other Tuesday. "I want a divorce," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "You have until Friday to move your things." That was it. No argument, no explanation. Just a deadline like I was a contractor who'd overstayed a project. I stood in the kitchen we had renovated together, in the kitchen where I had spent 3 years cooking Sunday dinners for his mother and his brother, and every colleague he ever wanted to impress, and I waited for more words. They didn't come. "Marcus." My voice was steady. I surprised myself. "What is happening right now?" He finally looked up. And that look, I will never forget it. Not angry, not guilty, just done. "The way you look at a lease you've decided not to renew. It's not working," he said. "You know it's not working." Then he picked up his phone again, and I understood I had been dismissed. I had met my husband 6 years earlier at a mutual friend's housewarming in Lincoln Park. He was charming in that particular way. Some men are the kind of charming that feels like sunlight, that makes you lean toward it without realizing you're moving. He was launching his second real estate development company. I was 2 years into my career as a financial auditor at a mid-size firm downtown. We talked for 3 hours that night, and he asked for my number before I'd finished my first drink. By our second year together, I was doing his books on weekends. Not officially, just helping. He would spread spreadsheets across the dining room table, and I would sit beside him and find the errors he missed, restructure the projections, flag the irregularities. He called me his secret weapon. He said he didn't know how he'd ever managed without me. We got married in September, 4 years ago. Small ceremony. His mother, Diane, cried during the vows. His brother, Derek, gave a toast that was mostly about my husband and barely mentioned me, but I laughed along with everyone else. By year 2 of our marriage, I wasn't just helping on weekends. I was working evenings, building out the financial architecture for his third development project, a mixed-use complex on the north side he was calling the Hargrove. I structured the investor reporting. I built the compliance framework. I created the internal audit trail that kept the whole thing clean and fundable. I did all of this while keeping my own full-time job. I did all of this without a single piece of paper with my name on it. That was my mistake. And I knew it was a mistake. I knew it the way you know a stove burner is hot not because you've touched it, but because you understand how heat works. I knew, and I let it happen anyway, because I trusted him, and because love makes you believe that documentation is for strangers. He was gone by the time I came back from work on Wednesday, 2 days after the coffee and pajamas announcement. Not gone from the house. Gone from any version of the conversation. His phone went to voicemail. He had moved into the guest bedroom and locked the door. On Thursday morning, I came downstairs to find his mother sitting at my kitchen table. Diane had always been pleasant to me in the surface way that some mothers-in-law are pleasant, warm enough in public, watchful in private. She had her son's eyes and his particular talent for making a statement sound like a question. "I think you know this has been coming," she said, wrapping both hands around a mug of my coffee. She had let herself in with the key I'd given her 2 years ago for emergencies. I sat down across from her. "I wasn't aware you were part of this conversation. I'm just here to make sure things stay civil." She smiled. "Marcus has already spoken to an attorney. Given that the house is in his name and the business assets are in the company's name, it should be fairly straightforward. We just want to make sure you're not going to make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her for a long moment. "Where is my husband?" "He's giving you space to process." "I see." I stood up. "Then I think you should go." She left, but not before setting a manila folder on the table. Inside was a drafted settlement offer. The number they were proposing for my portion of our marital assets was so low it was almost funny. Almost. I didn't call my friends. I didn't cry in the shower, though the urge was there, pressing against the back of my throat every morning for 2 weeks. I went to work. I did my job. And at night, I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh legal pad, and I started writing down everything I could remember. Every project, every spreadsheet, every investor call I had sat in on or prepared materials for, every weekend hour, every late night, every correction I had made to numbers that would have collapsed without me. My sister, Renee, came over on a Saturday and found me 3 hours into it, surrounded by printed emails and highlighted bank statements. Elena. She said Renee has always used my full name when she's concerned. What are you doing? Building a timeline, I said. She sat down. She looked at the papers. She is not a lawyer and neither am I, but she is a woman who has watched enough of our family's history to know when someone is being quietly robbed. What do you need? She asked. A scanner, I said. And more coffee. I retained an attorney named Patricia, and yes, I am aware of the irony of that name, given everything, but I only kept her for the initial consultation. I needed to understand the legal landscape. I needed to know exactly what I was walking into, before I decided how to walk into it. What she told me confirmed what I already suspected. Because I had never been formally listed as an employee, partner, or contractor for any of my husband's companies, I had no legal claim to business assets under Illinois partnership law, unless I could demonstrate a contribution so substantial and documented that a court would recognize an implied partnership or unjust enrichment. That's a high bar, she said. I know, I said. Do you have documentation? I opened my bag and slid the first folder across her desk. Her expression did not change exactly, but something in her eyes shifted the particular alertness of someone who has just seen something interesting. This is internal audit documentation, she said. Yes. With your name on the version history? Yes. For the Hargrove project? For all 3 projects. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, Mrs. Hargrove, who built the compliance architecture for these filings? I did, I said. Every quarter. For 4 years. She looked at me over the top of the folder. And your husband's legal team, do they know this? I don't believe they've checked, I said. She closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. I think you may want to reconsider representing yourself, she said. This is significant. I thanked her for her time. I paid her consultation fee in full. And then I went home and I kept building. The thing about working in financial auditing for 9 years is that you develop a specific kind of patience. You learn to follow a paper trail the way other people follow a plot, not rushing toward the ending, but tracing each step in order, because the ending only makes sense if you've walked the whole path. I had 4 years of that path. I had version histories on 47 internal documents, all time-stamped, all bearing the metadata of my personal laptop and my work email. I had a project management thread started on a platform my husband had asked me to set up and administer, where every task assignment, every completion note, every investor update had been routed through an account in my name. I had 3 years of Sunday emails to the accountant, sent from my personal address, attaching monthly reconciliations I had prepared. I also had something else. In the 2nd year of the Hargrove project, my husband had asked me to file for a specific financial compliance certification with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. It was a routine filing, part of keeping the project eligible for a particular class of institutional investors. He had been traveling. He'd asked me to handle it. I had filed it, under the company name, yes, but the preparer's signature, the individual attesting to the accuracy of the filing, was mine. My name. My license number from my auditing credentials. I had forgotten about it entirely until I was 3 weeks into building my timeline, and I found the confirmation email buried in a folder from 2023. I sat very still for a long time after I found that email. Then I opened a new document and I began to write my statement of claims. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in February. Chicago in February does what Chicago always does: it commits. The wind off the lake had dropped the temperature to 4 degrees, and the sky was the color of old concrete. I walked from the parking garage to the courthouse in a wool coat I had bought for a deposition 3 years ago, carrying a banker's box and a leather portfolio, and I did not feel the cold. My husband arrived with 2 attorneys from a firm on Michigan Avenue. One was senior, gray-haired, the kind of expensive that announces itself in the cut of a suit. The other was younger, sharper-looking, carrying a tablet and a rolling briefcase. Behind them came Diane, and behind her, Derek, my brother-in-law, who had the decency to look at the floor when he saw me. My husband looked at me across the marble lobby, and his face did the thing I had been preparing myself for: the almost sympathetic, deeply satisfied expression of a man who believes he has already won. "Wow," he said. glancing at my banker's box. You're representing yourself? I didn't answer. Elena. He stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice in the way people do when they want to sound reasonable. You should have taken the offer. This is going to be embarrassing for you. I looked at him. I thought about the kitchen, the spreadsheets on the dining room table, the Sunday dinners, the 4 years. Probably, I said, and I walked to the elevator. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent light, a gallery of maybe 15 people, his family on one side, a few curious courthouse regulars on the other. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named the Honorable Cheryl Watkins. She had short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain and the particular expression of someone who has heard every version of every story and is waiting to be surprised. The senior attorney, I'll call him opposing counsel, because that's all he was opened by establishing the asset structure. The house was held solely in my husband's name, purchased before our marriage. The 3 development companies were registered LLCs with my husband as sole member. The investment accounts were individual accounts. By the structure of it, on paper, I owned nothing that had been built in the last 6 years. He was thorough. He was good. I watched him and I thought, he hasn't read the compliance filing. When it was my turn, I stood up. I had practiced this. Not the words exactly, but the speed, the pauses. I knew where I needed to slow down and let something land. I knew where I needed to move quickly before the other side could object and redirect. I introduced my evidence in order. The document version histories, the project management records, the investor communication threads, the Sunday reconciliation emails. I laid each one down in sequence, and I watched Judge Watkins pick each one up, and I watched her reading glasses come down off her chain and onto her nose. Opposing counsel objected twice. Both times she sustained and moved on. The third time he started to object, she held up one hand without looking at him. She was reading the compliance filing. The courtroom was very quiet. She read it twice. Then she looked up not at me, not at my husband, but at the senior attorney. Counsel, she said. Are you familiar with this IDFPR filing from March of 2023? He leaned over to his associate. A brief, whispered exchange. Something shifted in the posture of the associate, a slight stiffening, the body's involuntary signal that something has gone wrong. We were not made aware of this specific filing, Your Honor. She looked at him for a moment over her glasses. The preparer of record on this certification, which was filed on behalf of Hargrove Capital Development LLC, is not your client. She turned the document slightly toward him. It is the petitioner, who is currently representing herself. She paused. Do you understand the implications of that? The silence that followed was different from the silence that had come before it. It had a texture. I heard Diane shift in her seat behind me. I heard Derek clear his throat. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on the judge, and I waited, and I thought about all the Tuesday mornings and the Sunday nights, and the spreadsheets on the dining room table, and I let the silence do its work. She did not rule that day. Family court rarely rules from the bench on financial matters of that complexity. But she ordered a full forensic accounting of all 3 Hargrove development entities, to be completed within 60 days. She appointed a neutral third-party CPA to conduct it. She also referred the compliance filing discrepancy to the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation for a regulatory review. That last part was not something I had asked for. She did that on her own. My husband's senior attorney asked for a continuance to gather additional materials. Judge Watkins denied it. Court was adjourned. I walked out of the courthouse the same way I had walked in with my banker's box and my leather portfolio, into the Chicago February cold. I got to the parking garage stairwell and I stood there for about 30 seconds with my hand on the railing and just breathed. My phone buzzed. It was Renee. How did it go? I typed back. She ordered forensic accounting. 3 dots. Then, Elena. I put my phone in my coat pocket, and I kept walking. The forensic accounting took 51 days. I know because I counted. The CPA firm filed their report on a Wednesday afternoon. I had it by Friday. I read it twice, once quickly and once slowly, which is how I read everything that matters. What they found was not a surprise to me. I had suspected it from the patterns, the rounding irregularities in quarterly reports, the timing of certain capital distributions, the gap between declared project costs and the contractor invoices I had seen pass through the accounts. When you spend 4 years building an audit trail, you also see the places where someone has been quietly building a different kind of trail alongside yours. My husband had been misclassifying personal expenses as business expenditures across all 3 companies for approximately 3 years. The total was significant. Significant enough that when the IDFPR review flagged it and forwarded the matter to the IRS, the word that came back through channels, through a call Renee got from a friend who worked downtown, was that they were opening a formal inquiry. Not a civil matter. A federal inquiry. The settlement came 11 weeks after the hearing. I did not take the first offer. Or the second. My husband's attorneys kept adjusting numbers, kept restructuring proposed agreements, kept adding and removing clauses about non-disclosure and future business interests. Each time, I read every word. Each time I sent back a counter. On the 4th offer, I called Renee. "Read me the last paragraph," she said. I read it. "Take it," she said. I thought about it. I thought about the kitchen, and the spreadsheets, and the timeline I had built in the weeks after he told me to leave the pages and pages of careful documentation, the paper trail that had always been there, waiting for me to pick it up. "Yeah," I said. "I think so too." The number I received was not a victory lap number. It was not dramatic. It was not the kind of thing that makes a clean ending. It was enough to start something new, enough to matter, enough to reflect what 4 years of invisible labor is actually worth when someone finally looks at it directly and assigns it a value. I signed on a Tuesday. He signed 2 days later. The day the final documents were processed, I went back to the office, sat at my desk, and opened the quarterly report I had been working on for a client. I found 3 classification errors in the first 30 minutes. I fixed them, noted them in the audit trail, and moved on. My hands were steady. They had been steady for a while now. I don't tell this story because I want you to be angry on my behalf. The anger came and went for me, and what's left is something quieter and more durable, the particular confidence of someone who has tested her own foundation and found it solid. What I want you to take from this is simpler. Document everything. Not because the people you love will betray you, maybe they won't, but because your work has value, whether or not someone else is willing to acknowledge it. Because a paper trail is not distrust. It is just accuracy. It is just the truth, written down. So that when the moment comes, and sometimes the moment comes, you are not standing in a courtroom trying to remember. You are standing there holding the proof. My husband thought he knew the shape of what I had and hadn't built. He thought he understood the difference between help and contribution, between a wife who sat beside him at the table and a professional who had quietly constructed the architecture that held everything together. He was wrong about that. And a federal filing, a forensic accountant, and one Thursday morning in front of Judge Watkins were enough to prove it. If you've been through something like this, or you're in the middle of something like this right now, I want you to know that the thing they told you didn't exist? It probably does. Keep looking. Keep building the record. The truth has version history. Pull it up. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Maple Revenge. There are more stories here, more women who were underestimated, more moments where the math finally told the truth. Ring the bell so you don't miss them. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. I'll see you in the next one.